Welcome in, guys. What's going on? What's going on? Why do I still have this up? Get rid of this. Get rid of that. What's going on, Randy? Welcome in. Get started here shortly. But how'd everyone do today? I know today was probably a little bit unexpected. I mean, we've been on such a streak, just a green streak right now. Apple finally broke its rally. Being green 11 days in a row. She's finally broke that on the 12th day here now. I think, I mean, I little pretty much expected it. I made a comment in the bear den. Those of you that maybe are inside of that in Discord, there, I pretty much made a comment that I was expecting today to be that red day, in particular. Also, the fact that I just thought that that 180 mark on Apple was pretty much going to be quite the resistance to get over today, and that was likely going to be the leading downfall in terms of that. That was kind of like my leading indicator, if I want to say that. Amongst other things going on with the bond yields pretty much inverting, a lot of things just on the sideline with the whole Ukraine Russia kind of also headlining as well. Apparently, there was a headline that optimism fades in terms of resolution there between the two sides. That's something that was also on the headline. But today pretty much just felt like it was really just a much needed exhaustion kind of day. That's really what it felt like to me. I know from an EW perspective, the Elliott Wave traders, they're pretty much calling this to be like quote unquote wave four of perspective, pretty much a flat correction, if you want to say that. And to me, it's honestly just setting us up for what would be our blow off the top, our last leg here, in which we'll likely see going into tomorrow and possibly Friday. Um, Two things pretty much just stand out from that kind of perspective in terms of a blow off the top within the next day to two here. Is pretty much just names like that have pretty much actually started this rally is looking at Apple and Tesla. Those two names, I don't think the moves have completely finished just yet. We haven't seen Apple pretty much tap that 180 mark. And honestly, I do think that it's actually going to get close enough to that 183 high that we had, the all-time high, in which we heard Apple being a $3 trillion company. So it would not surprise me to see Apple trading at that all-time high by Friday, in which that gives it quite a bit of room. We saw the selling pressure kind of try and take it down below that 177.50 level, but it wasn't able to hold it down because that was a hell of a recovery that we got into the close. So that was pretty much a beautiful sign to see it recover the way that it did. And then the other fact is Tesla, which I will get a chart up on the screen here for Tesla, but Tesla actually held up quite well today. I know that that 11:15 mark was pretty much heavy resistance the past 2 days, more so, and that was actually something I was watching. But honestly, I think it's gonna blow past that. 1050 wouldn't surprise me, and if we really see this blow off the top, really get momentum towards that tech sector, 1200, I think it's still on deck, in which we could see that likely trade. So that's something that I'm still keeping an eye on. And I point that out because honestly, Apple and Tesla have really started this rally in terms of just leading it. And I think they're going to be finishing this rally as well, in which we see this end stage of this entire rally probably commence by the end of Friday. All right. But as I pretty much push right into what I'm looking at in terms of projections here, some ES Nasdaq Futures. Normally I look at SPY, but I just had it already charted up on Futures. So pretty much looking at this little leading diagonal rising wedge type formation here we have on ES. We bounced right where we needed to off this trendline support. So that was the ideal spot that I was watching to see us hold. You put in that low, that 45.74 on ES here, and obviously you see that quick little recovery price action that we had. So that was a hell of a recovery. That's why I'm a little bit more convinced also that the fact that we bounced right where we needed to, we held within that rising wedge. We could have easily escalated this downside pressure, and we could have saw a lot more of a rollover between, especially those two names that I just mentioned, Apple and Tesla. They definitely could have broken down this rising wedge. So the fact that we ended up bouncing right where we needed to, I can see that next leg that pretty much takes us right into my supply zone that I have. And I think it's more or less the same thing as what Avery has on his, also in his ideas that he posted. It's pretty much pushing as far north as 46.71. And then my supply zone pretty much starts right around 46.65 ish, is where I have that supply zone pretty much starting. So that's exactly what I'm looking at. Honestly, of course, we're looking at still this low from today. If we end up retesting that low, and we break that tomorrow, that 45.74, it is going to pretty much smell trouble for the bulls, and we're going to end up seeing continuation to the downside, in which we're going to see more selling pressure just continue to mount. But I think we're going to need a bigger headline. We're going to need pretty much worse data with going into tomorrow, which, if I'm not mistaken, we do have data coming out tomorrow as well. So that's something you want to keep an eye on. Some more job data coming out tomorrow. So that's going to be something you want to watch. But if we do see that downside pressure, then 45.33, I would not even be surprised to see if we end up trading down that low within the next day or two. So that's pretty much the next key level that I'm watching if we do start to get that downside pressure. All right. But that's pretty much ES. In terms of NASDAQ, basically what I was looking at is this little broadening, ascending broadening wedge type action. And I think they looked a little bit better on the 1 hour here. Yeah. So looking at the 1 hour, obviously again, you pretty much had that trend line support off of this wedge. We bounced right where we needed to, and we pretty much got that little 3 bar action to the upside. So looking at this one, pretty much same scenario in which we can make that push to the upside here. I thought I actually had my upside targets here, but I didn't have it outlined. So, but I do expect us to pretty much make push here. We'll get over this 15,190 here, and that'll be a beautiful push off of Nasdaq to get that acceleration to the upside. In terms of just key names that really just stood out again, pretty much highlighting Tesla here. That was probably the first one that caught my attention off of this. Was pretty much looking at the formations we had. If we did it back from pretty much the 22nd of March, pretty much to the end of the 25th, you see that you had that beautiful little bull pennant action that you had. You had the nice flag pull, you had the bullish pennant, you had the gap up. Here today, we pretty much had what you would want to call it a wedge, you want to call it a ascending triangle, either one. You have the same formation in which we basically created a nice little trendline support for this triangle. If you pretty much see that I pull off the trendline, it literally flushes right against it to create a nice little trendline support action here today. So that pretty much caught my attention on the 45-minute. If you looked at different time frames, you could have got a different image, a different interpretation of this. But I think we're setting up a nice little wedge in which we basically build a nice little base off of that end of day drop, in which we try to recover pretty convincingly. I think we got as low as about 1086 here this afternoon on Tesla, but it was a hell of a recovery, about an $8 recovery off of that. So I like this one. I do see us pretty much trading up pretty much as high as I have my target at 1151 is what I'm looking at for upside. If we do see much more of a convincing gap up tomorrow, and I'm gonna really have to see a high gap up tomorrow, then we can start to talk about the 20. I have 1282 and then the 1200 is what I'm looking at. 1182 and then 1200. My bad. So 1182 and then 1200 if we really push and we get a nice gap up. But 1151 was that target I was ideally watching here, in which I would expect to break that 1115 mark that's actually acted as resistance here these past 2 days. So that's what I'm gonna watch for. In terms of being a bear here on Tesla, if we end up breaking under 1075, that's when I'm gonna turn bear on Tesla, and then we'll pretty much flirt with testing the gap fill down towards 1055. Otherwise, I think that this pretty much it stopped right where it needed to in terms of creating quote unquote trendline support for this little triangle formation, and we should be able to get a nice little gap up tomorrow. If not gap up, we'll get a nice little uptrend to break that 1115 mark tomorrow morning. So I think this one's pretty much just setting up beautifully. The other one, pretty much going off of what I was talking about, was Apple. In terms of this one, if I go out towards, I think the weekly chart pretty much gives you the better image. Is I'm pretty much watching that 180. That was that mental number. We pretty much couldn't get over it. We got as high as 179.61 yesterday, and that's what was pretty much giving me that indication where we were gonna fade, and we'll see at a later time that push over that 180 mark. So we faded it, pretty much getting to that 179.61. I expect to get a convincing break over that 180 mark going into tomorrow, and then we can get as high as that prior high here that we have from 182.94, in which we'll be talking about the $3 trillion company yet again. As we already heard the headlines of Apple with their own little financing program that they're coming out, which pretty much hit Affirm, PayPal, and all the other financials, MasterCard, Visa. I think they all took a hit after the news with Apple pretty much creating their own finance system. So that's something that I'm going to be watching. If we get that break over 180, I think that's the point where I'll really try and get into Apple calls for a scalp up to that 183. Otherwise, I may just watch it, try to break that 180 mark, and then we'll see if that ends up being a rejection there or not. All right. So that's one that's also catching my attention. The other one that I was a little bit intrigued about was Facebook. This one caught my attention just because of the fact that I know that it was pretty resilient a little bit early on in the day. And what kind of caught my attention was this little ascending channel formation that's pretty much on deck here. This is what I'm going to be watching for. I think we can get a beautiful push out of this, in which we can trade this up towards 239, 240 is what I'll be watching for. Obviously, it's a little more skeptic right now. I do need to see a little bit more of a convincing price action. If she breaks over that 231 mark, that's where I'm going to get more ideally looking at this one. Until she breaks that 231, I'll be a little bit more skeptic in terms of this price action. But she breaks that 231, I can easily see this at 239, 240. And that may end up being a beautiful about $10 move that you're looking at for upside here from current levels. So I'm going to look for that one. I think that'll be a beautiful one. In terms of being a bear on Facebook, obviously you're looking at the gap fill here. You break under this 225.31, then we could talk about being a bear and basically shorting it into that gap fill that completes at 223.65. But she literally bounced off of trendline support right now. That's pretty much the key thing right now if you notice. So that trendline support literally held today. So it's not really in the sense that I'm looking to short this right here, right now, Adrian. If you're looking at shorting it, I would look to short it if it gets under the 225.31 in terms of pretty much capturing that gap fill. Because right now you're basically trying to short at trendline support if you're trying to do that right now, which is a little bit more risky. So I would wait for it to give you that confirmation to test the gap fill and break down into it, and then you go for that short on Facebook because it does seem a little bit more risky right now. Uh, I'll respond to that later. But again, yeah, I think Facebook's pretty much just sitting at a trendline support. So I would wait for it to confirm the breakdown into the gap fill, and that's when I would look for that short. But otherwise, 239, 240 is my upside target. Again, pretty much piggybacking off the sense that it looks like it has one more leg up on this ascending channel. And then also the fact that I'm looking for a potential blow off the top here in this entire market rally that we've had the past few days. So today kind of just felt like that resting day, that consolidation kind of day that was much needed. But other than that, I think those are the names that pretty much caught my attention for the most part. We already saw Walmart kind of make its move here. I think that's the one that I was also calling out earlier on. Hopefully, some of you caught it. I think some of you actually tagged me about it. But that was just a beautiful wedge breakout. You had the beautiful retest here down at that 141 half, and you are pushing. I do think we have a little bit more room to the upside here. 151 half up to 152 is where I'm pretty much targeting on Walmart. So I do think we're gonna get a little bit more of a push here, but I think we can get a little more of a pullback here. In this case, I think we can pull back as far as this 148, low 148, in which it gives a breather here for tech to just continue this rally before quote unquote value pretty much gets their place in continuation. All right. So I kind of consider this one more of a value play. Once we usually see tech kind of take a breather here, usually value in terms of names like Walmart, will actually pretty much make their uptrend. So I'll give this one a pause right now. I'll look to get back into it on that low 148 mark. So hopefully we get a little bit of a dip tomorrow on Walmart. And then I'll look for those calls, the 152 calls going out towards next week to pretty much swing that. So that's one I'm still on watch for this one. Other than that, the other names I was kind of watching earlier on was the chip names. I was potentially looking at AMD at that 122 level, the low 122. That pretty much broke my level. As you see, the sell-off pretty much intensified. So I'm gonna be a little sidelined on the semis. I know that Avery was also watching NVIDIA. I think he wanted to push north of like that 281, breaking over 286, but obviously selling pressure got to the semis here today, so they weren't able to hold up. So I'm gonna pretty much avoid that going into tomorrow. I'm not gonna necessarily look at too much of the semis. Kind of just focusing on the two names that started this rally, Apple and Tesla, and then piggybacking off of Facebook, in which I love that bounce off of the trendline support. So those are kind of the three main ones that are on my watch list tomorrow: Apple, Tesla, and Facebook. Other than that, you can probably point towards Amazon maybe as well. I think Amazon's one that I think Sig was also looking at. I had us coming down as though it's about this 33 flat level. We didn't get that far down. So we'll look to see if we get any kind of momentum. If we're looking for a bounce in terms of where you want to see this break over, I want to see this over this 33.51 mark, in which we can get a beautiful push over 33.80, and we can see potentially 3400 trade. So that's gonna be what I'm gonna be potentially watching on Amazon. But that's pretty much at the bottom of my watch list. In terms of this, because I'm really more focused on what started this rally and what's gonna end up finishing this rally, in which those two names of Apple and Tesla. All right. So that's one that's just pretty much on the back burner. But I think those are primarily the names that I really wanted to highlight for you guys, in which that I'm really kind of focusing on in terms of this rally just concluding here within the next day or two. So hopefully I kind of gave you guys a better insight what I'm expecting. Again, I think today was just a healthy pullback. Just to give you that insight yet again, it was a healthy pullback. It was a much needed pullback. We had how many days of just a strong rally? Apple had just carried us 11 straight days of just green, and Tesla's just being on that back burner, just carrying that momentum alongside Apple. So I'm gonna look for both of those names to finish this strong. We'll get this last push into the end of the week here, and I think we'll pretty much just wake up tomorrow, see what the levels are, and go from there though. Because I didn't swing too heavily on anything. What I actually held overnight was basically, I think I had a small position on Facebook calls, and I grabbed one Tesla call here overnight to see what ends up happening tomorrow. But other than that, I'm gonna wait for tomorrow. I don't want to get myself in too much of a hole swinging any heavy positions tonight. So I'll wait for that, see how Facebook and Tesla does tomorrow morning. Maybe we get a gap up or so tomorrow, and then I'll go from there to see what the market pretty much presents to myself. All right. But other than that, hopefully that kind of gave you guys an insight what I'm looking at, what I'm seeing in terms of levels, the names that I'm really focusing on. But other than that, kind of wraps it up. V, I appreciate the comment for my analysis. Appreciate you guys. Other than that, though, let's see if there's any headline. I mean, I'm sure once we get this little blow off the top, we kind of push that 467 on SPY, then we're likely going to see some, whether it be a headline, whether it be some breaking news here by end of Friday or over the weekend. I'm sure it's going to be some kind of caveat that's going to end up being our downfall, and it's going to end up giving us that U-turn. So, one big thing I will say is be cautious about swinging anything going into Friday and also into the weekend. So that's pretty much my caution for you guys, just because of the fact that once you usually get to that end stage or that blow off the top kind of scenario, it's usually going to be news that pretty much will end up being your downfall, and I won't even be surprised if it ends up happening overnight. That's pretty much the deadly part about that. I can't even count the number of times in which that's usually happened, in which usually bear markets like that usually catch you off guard because they end up happening non-market hours. So be cautious about that going into Friday and on the weekend. So tomorrow and day trading going into tomorrow and Friday, I would strictly just say play it level by level. Obviously, I'm shooting for the upside rather than the downside right now to finish the rally. Play it level by level. Just be cautious about the swings because you are gonna get slaughtered about that. All right. But again, hopefully that helped. That kind of wraps up our session today, guys. But I'll see you guys on live tomorrow morning, and we'll see what it is. All right, guys. Appreciate you joining. But I'm out.